Is the feeling of not being enough universal?
I don't think it's a universal, but I think it's very widespread. It's particularly evident in people who have come from families where there's alcoholism, drug addiction, or mental illness, and other kinds of. Well, I'll tell you a story actually that's going to be relevant to this and to stuff we're doing later in the weekend. I once went on a training course with a guy called Robert Dilts about basically dealing with double binds. And so he was talking about double binds. And the idea of a double bind is kind of you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, you're damned if you can't decide. So he was talking about, funnily enough, to your point, he was saying the place where you don't see double binds and where you don't see this whole notion of not feeling good enough and that sort of thing are in cultures where there's a notion of positive sponsorship. And it goes kind of like this. In a culture, a community, a tribe where there's positive sponsorship, each child that's born into the community is seen as like you're very precious. And not only are you precious because you're the future of the community, you know, the future men and women of the community and that sort of thing, but it's widely recognized that as a child, you bring with you crucial and unique gifts and abilities and qualities that the tribe, the community, the culture needs in order to survive and prosper and thrive and so on. And so each child is sponsored into the community, and the kind of messages of positive sponsorship that they get are messages like, you're enough, you are good enough, and you're here for a reason, and you matter, and your opinion counts, and you're valuable. You don't need anything to do, you don't need to do anything to become valuable. You're already valuable. And you're here for a reason. And you may not even know what that reason is yet, but you are. You've been placed in this world with a particular set of missions and discoveries and gifts to give. And we recognize the value of you giving those. So I'm listening to this is like 2006. So, you know, nearly 20 years ago. And I'm listening to this. Robert's got this very nice California accent. And I'm kind of like, oh, it sounds like being in a Hallmark gift card shop. And then he says, now, many people grow up in cultures that say the opposite, that they're not valuable, but maybe if they achieve enough, one day they will be, or that they're not here for a reason, or that their opinion doesn't count, or that sort of thing. And I was suddenly like, oh, I recognize those. I recognize those. And so I think in much of our Western civilization, and maybe much of our global civilization these days, I think there's a lack of positive sponsorship, but not universally. Some families, some communities, some cultures still give that. But for many people, there's a lack of positive sponsorship, and there's an implicit negative sponsorship that's reinforced by, you know, it's an interesting story. I don't know if you ever saw an Adam Curtis film called Century of the South. What Adam Curtis does is he finds incredible BBC archive footage and then threads together narratives about the culture and the century based on that archive footage. It's amazing. So the first one of those I saw was, I think, a 6-part series called Century of the South. And one of the stories he tells in that is of Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays was I think, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he was a psychologist. And during the war, I think it was the Second World War, the American military approached him, asking him if he could help them to build public support for the war. And so he started planting articles in newspapers and magazines and that sort of thing to get the public on the side of war. And he did a great job of it and kind of is seen as the grandfather of the public relations industry. And so after the war was over, large industry and corporates, noticed the great job he's done. And they said, well, could you help us build support and interest in sales of our products? And so he said, sure, I'll help you out with that. And so he started, planting articles and consulting on their advertisements and that sort of thing. And it increased product sales. And then he discovered something incredibly powerful. Like the nature of advertising used to be something along the lines of Browns make shoes. If you need shoes at some point in the future, maybe if your current pair of shoes wears out, consider buying Brown's shoes because we do a hell of a good job and they'll last you a long time. And they look pretty snazzy too. So if you need shoes, buy Brown's shoes. That was kind of the structure of advertising. And then Bernays saw that if you could instill the idea in people that they were somehow incomplete without the product, that the product completed them as a person, that would be good for business. And that idea took hold and has pretty much infested the totality of modern consumer marketing. And so this notion of negative sponsorship, which I mentioned, is massively bolstered by and supported by and reinforced by much of the semantic environment we live in, both in PR terms and in advertising terms. So have a nice day. But so as a result of that, I think it's really valuable. Couple of things, one of the things I've mentioned is that, in my opinion, the two most valuable things a person can discover are how experience is created and who you really are. How experience is created, we're living in the experience of what I'm calling the principle of thought taking form in the moment to moment. And who you really are is the divine energy of consciousness. Now, there are a bunch of ways you could say that. If you don't like the word divine, you say who you really are is consciousness itself. Or if you don't like the idea of the principle of thought, you could say you're living in the experience of the intelligent energy behind life, creating a reality moment to moment. There's another way of looking at it. These are just, all of these ways of talking about it are just metaphors to describe something that's beyond form, that's beyond language, that's beyond concepts and beliefs and ideas. But to your point, yeah, I think that the notion of I'm not enough, but if I accomplish the right thing or achieve the right thing or am seen to be the right thing, then maybe one day I'll be enough. That is widespread. That is a meme that's been embodied by billions of people and is somewhat life-sapping, I would say. And so developing the ability, A, to see through that for your clients, but also to enter more and more deeply into the knowing of the truth of your being for yourself is profoundly valuable because the fact of the matter is who you already are is lacking for nothing. You already have all the peace and truth and beauty and love and intelligence and confidence and joy that you will ever need residing at the heart of your being. And there's nothing in this world of form that could ever detract or subtract from that. There's nothing that could ever happen to you that would damage that or diminish that in any way. The idea that it's somewhere out there in the world of form is one of the most compelling ideas there is, because then we go looking for it, but it's not true. It's not true. It's not to say there aren't useful things in the world of form. I'm a fan of tea. If I want tea, I go to the world of form for that because it's the best place to get it. But if you want love, joy, peace, security, well-being, clarity, resilience, and beauty, that resides at the heart of your being. And the more people know that, the better a world we live in, as far as I can tell. Thanks for your attention. I look forward to seeing you soon.